Chapter 16, The Darkness of Apocalypse. Darkness weighed heavily on the forest like an overstuffed burrito sitting in your stomach after 3 a.m. A dozen flickering torches cut through the suffocating gloom as the Order of Ratiel's pursuit squad scoured the woods, their swords drawn and ready for action. Apparently, this was their idea of a good time. Over here! This way! We've found him! Ah, nothing like a group of holy soldiers yelling ominously in the middle of the night. The light danced across the trees, revealing a man crouching among the bushes, his appearance so average he could have been a stock photo for generic man. "They're already here," he muttered, eyes glinting like someone who just realized they forgot to take the chicken out of the freezer for dinner. The soldiers surrounded him, swords glistening in the torchlight. One of them, a paladin who clearly liked the sound of his own voice, stepped forward. "Fallen necromancer," the paladin declared, chest puffed out. "Kneel and beg forgiveness before the goddess." Oh yeah. Nothing says I'm going to be reasonable like demanding someone to kneel. Surprisingly, the necromancer wasn't having it. Gah! The man's eyes darted around like he'd just been caught in the middle of something way worse than dark magic. Rah! He roared like he was auditioning for a metal band. Darkness surged around him, and boom, 5 evil spirits materialized from the shadows like the worst backup dancers you've ever seen. "Be wary," the paladin shouted, gripping his sword like it was prom night, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. "He commands evil spirits." Oh, really? We couldn't tell from the swirling mass of shadows forming literal demons. Thanks, Captain Obvious. But the soldiers stood their ground, unfazed. I guess when you're this deep into your holy mission, a bunch of spirits trying to claw your face off is just another Tuesday. Holy talismans in hand, they thrust their swords forward, cutting through the evil spirits like someone using a chainsaw on butter. It was impressive, in a disturbingly violent kind of way. Unfortunately for them, the necromancer bolted into the trees faster than a guy who's just been asked to meet his girlfriend's parents. "You're not getting away!" The paladin yelled, probably hoping for some cinematic chase scene. Fred, oh yes, this necromancer's name is Fred, truly a name that inspires fear, hit the ground running, summoning more evil spirits. Because when in doubt, throw more darkness at the problem, right? The paladin sliced through them like a boss, but Fred, that sly devil, had already vanished. Paladin dude just stood there, clenching his jaw so tight it was a wonder he didn't break a tooth. Humph, he won't get far, that filthy necromancer. Sure, buddy, keep telling yourself that. Fred was huffing and puffing through the underbrush like someone who hadn't done cardio in years. "Damn those dogs of the goddess," he muttered between gasps, already regretting not working on his fitness. 6 months ago, Fred had been a nobody, a laborer in the slums of Derat City, spending his days getting bossed around and his nights drowning in cheap liquor. And now? Now he was the most wanted necromancer in the land. Progress. It had all started on one particularly crappy night when Fred had collapsed in the slums, drunk and despairing. Damn it, this wretched world. He mumbled his classic line, because who doesn't love a good existential crisis after a few too many drinks? But instead of passing out like usual, the darkness literally engulfed him. "Oh, shit," was probably what went through his mind as the shadows crept in, chilling him to the bone. But then fear faded away, replaced by something even more intoxicating than cheap whiskey. Power. Real power. The kind that came with whispers of doom and guaranteed you'd never be invited to brunch again. The voice in his head gave him a simple choice: reject the darkness and go back to his miserable life, or embrace it and finally become someone important. Fred didn't hesitate for a second. I mean, if you'd spent your life being treated like dirt, you'd probably say yes to necromantic powers too, right? Fast forward to now. Fred, once a broke laborer, was a fully fledged necromancer with a kill list longer than a Black Friday shopping line. His powers had allowed him to off anyone who'd ever pissed him off. Guildmasters, thugs, rich people, you name it. But like all idiots who get a little taste of power, Fred hadn't thought about the consequences. The 7 Orders, always on the lookout for signs of the apocalypse, had caught wind of his spree, and now Fred was public enemy number 1. The pursuit was relentless, and to top it all off, the Holy Knights were immune to his evil spirits. If only I had more power. Fred muttered, like a guy whose video game character was stuck at level 5. It wasn't his fault that everyone was better than him. No, it was the lack of power. Totally. I'll kill you all, he swore, delusions of grandeur clouding his mind. Classic Fred. Meanwhile, the Order of Ratiel's pursuit squad lay in wait at the mouth of a mountain pass, planning an ambush with all the enthusiasm of a high school debate team plotting against their rival. When Fred eventually stumbled onto their trap, squinting in the sudden light, his reaction was priceless. Damn it, Rap. Really, Fred? They surrounded him, and, predictably, he summoned his evil spirits again. This time, though, he was pissed. I wield the great power of darkness, he yelled, as if that was supposed to be intimidating. And sure, the spirits put up a good fight, but the soldiers knew what they were doing. Holy talismans, coordinated formations. It was like watching a well-choreographed dance, except with more stabbing. Fred, ever the sore loser, was horrified to see his spirits fall, one by one. And just when he thought things couldn't get worse, a wraith, yes, a literal wraith, rose from the ground, mowing down soldiers like they were flies at a barbecue. Is he a high necromancer? The soldiers asked, voices trembling with fear. Please. Fred didn't know the first thing about proper necromancy. He was like a toddler playing with matches. High above, Karnak and Barros, two mysterious figures watching from a distance, rolled their eyes at Fred's clumsy display of power. Look at him, rampaging like a drunk uncle at Thanksgiving, Karnak muttered. Summoning a wraith with brute force? Embarrassing. But hey, at least Fred's sloppy summoning bought him enough time to run. Again. This just got easier, Karnak said, grinning, and with that, they moved in for the catch. There you have it. Fred, the necromancer who didn't read the instructions, on the run again. Will he ever learn? Probably not. But hey, it's entertaining to watch him try, right? Fred's breath was ragged, his legs burning as he ran for his life. The Order of Ratiel had nearly caught him, and even though his wraith had bought him some time, he knew they would not stop. They were relentless, driven by their holy mission. Just a little further, just a little more. His mind swirled with desperation, feeding his power with dark energy. Every step seemed to pull him deeper into the void he had embraced, but it also tore away what remained of his sanity. Behind him, the sounds of battle began to fade as the wraith continued to wreak havoc. He could hear the terrified cries of soldiers, and the sound filled him with a brief, twisted sense of satisfaction. They deserve this, he thought bitterly. They deserve to be destroyed. Fred knew, however, that this wouldn't last. He couldn't maintain this pace forever. He had to find a place to hide, somewhere he could regain his strength. Somewhere. Anywhere. Just as he started to feel his legs give out beneath him, he saw it, a small cave nestled within the cliffs ahead. It was just large enough for him to crawl into, and it would shield him from view. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself inside, collapsing against the cold stone walls, gasping for air. His body was trembling, both from exertion and from the overwhelming darkness that had taken hold of him. He clenched his fists, feeling the raw, chaotic power surging through him. It was wild and untamed, but it was his. It was all he had left. I will survive. I will get stronger. I will. His voice trailed off, his mind consumed by the endless hunger for power. Meanwhile, back at the mountain pass, the battle had reached a standstill. The wraith was still wreaking havoc among the Order's ranks, but the priests were slowly gaining the upper hand. Priest Rosso wiped the sweat from his brow, his face etched with determination. Don't let up! We must banish this creature before it destroys us all. The soldiers, though exhausted and battered, rallied behind him, their blades glowing with holy light. They knew what was at stake. The necromancer could not be allowed to escape, and the wraith had to be destroyed. As they prepared for one final push, a figure appeared on the ridge above them. It was Karnak, standing tall and imposing, his eyes glowing with the dark energy of necromancy. Such a pitiful display, Karnak muttered, watching the scene unfold. These fools have no idea what they're up against. Beside him, Barros shifted uneasily. Young master, what should we do? The Order is still fighting the wraith, and Fred has managed to escape. Karnak's lips curled into a cold smile. Let them deal with the wraith. It's a fitting punishment for their arrogance. As for Fred, his eyes glinted with a predatory gleam. We'll deal with him ourselves. Fred had barely caught his breath when he sensed something, an ominous presence creeping closer. He pushed himself up against the cave wall, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who's there?" His voice was weak, filled with fear and desperation. From the darkness, two figures emerged. Karnak and Barrows stood at the entrance of the cave, their expressions unreadable. "Fred, isn't it?" Karnak asked, his voice calm but dangerous. "You've caused quite a stir, haven't you?" Fred's eyes darted between the two men, panic rising within him. He could sense the power radiating from Karnak. It was far greater than anything he had ever encountered. "Who are you?" Fred stammered. "What do you want?" Karnak stepped forward, his smile widening. "I'm here to offer you a choice, Fred, a chance to survive. But first..." Without warning, Karnak raised his hand, and a surge of dark energy shot forward, slamming into Fred and pinning him against the wall. "You're going to tell me everything you know," Fred screamed, the darkness consuming him completely. End of chapter 16. The Darkness of Apocalypse. Ah, Fred. Poor, clueless Fred, running through a dark forest, thinking he's outsmarting everyone with his grand escape. But really, he's just a guy whose biggest life skill is talking to ghosts. Evil spirits, if you will. It's like being that one guy at a party who insists on telling everyone about his ghost hunting hobby while everyone else is just trying to vibe. Fred's plan? Avoid the main path, because apparently, he's been captured so many times, he's finally figured out that sticking to the obvious road isn't a great idea. Smart, right? Well, it's Fred. So let's just say his decisions are like a coin flip. You never know if you're getting genius or disaster. He's stumbling through the woods, throwing out evil spirits like a drunk wizard with a destroy everything spell on loop. Fred is all about making an entrance, or in this case, carving out his own little forest highway. Meanwhile, he's running low on energy like your phone after a night out without a charger, muttering to himself like a zombie extra from a B-movie. Now, cut to Karnak and Barrows, our dynamic duo, hot on Fred's trail like seasoned detectives in a noir film, except their version of sleuthing involves tracking down leftover evil energy. Karnak's out here throwing shade at Fred for basically giving away his position like someone who left their Instagram location on during a bank heist. Karnak's not even mad, just disappointed. After all, he and Barrows have been through this same runaway necromancer phase in their past lives, so it's all feeling very déjà vu. Karnak even empathizes. Well, as much as a necromancer can. The only thing more awkward than their chase? Fred's dream of being a badass. I mean, sure, we've all had those power fantasy dreams, but Fred's out here imagining himself killing off nobles and making women beg for their lives. The guy's got issues. Freud would have a field day. Then, bam, reality check. Karnak and Barrows show up, ruining Fred's twisted fantasy. Our poor boy wakes up to their banter. And let's be real, it's the kind of banter that makes you question if these two are actually here to fight or just roast Fred for their entertainment. It's like Karnak and Barrows are running their own supernatural version of Mystery Science Theater 3000. And Fred is the cringy B-movie protagonist. Fred, thinking he's finally got his bad guy moment, summons a couple of evil spirits, all ready to get his revenge. But of course, Karnak and Barrows casually dismantle them like it's just a warm-up. Barrows slices through the spirits like he's cutting cake at a birthday party, throwing in some fancy sword techniques for good measure. Meanwhile, Karnak's tossing out magic like he's showing off at a fireworks festival, lighting the place up with fire and lightning. Fred? Well, he's left standing there, realizing his evil spirits are about as useful as a paper shield in a rainstorm. But does that stop him? Oh no. He digs deeper into his bag of tricks, summoning more spirits, trying to impress the duo with quantity over quality. It's like a bad talent show, and Fred's out here thinking if he just throws more at the problem, it'll fix itself. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Then, Fred decides it's time to pull out the big guns. He goes full extra, summoning a wraith, the most powerful spirit he's got. It's his final gotcha moment, ready to bring death and destruction, or at least he hopes. Karnak and Barrows actually take it seriously for a second, realizing this thing could be a problem. But in classic Karnak fashion, he just casually orders the wraith to kneel, and it does. Fred's left standing there, like someone who just watched their Uber driver pull up, only to realize they're actually sitting in the wrong car. His jaw drops, the wraith is on the ground, and Karnak is standing there like a necromantic boss who's seen it all before. It's the ultimate mic drop. Poor Fred. He's really out here playing checkers while Karnak and Barros are playing 4D chess. Fred stood there, his brain short-circuiting as he tried to process what just happened. His wraith, his strongest spirit, was on the ground, groveling before this smug, condescending stranger. This wasn't in the manual. Spirits were supposed to obey him, and yet here was this creature, prostrating itself as if Karnak were some sort of evil spirit king. Fred's panic reached new heights. "What the hell? How did you do that?" His voice cracked, a testament to just how unhinged things had gotten for him. Karnak, ever the calm, unbothered guy, looked at Fred like a bored cat eyeing a particularly dumb mouse. "I'm not in the mood to explain necromancy to amateurs," he said, dismissively waving his hand. "Besides, even if I did, you probably wouldn't get it." Barros chuckled beside him, clearly enjoying this way too much. "Fred, buddy, you're out of your league here. This isn't some cheap necromancer trick you're up against. You'd do well to run again." Fred gritted his teeth, hands trembling. "No, I'm not going to lose like this. I'm not weak." Karnak sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I really don't know what's worse, your weak necromancy or your pathetic bravado." He snapped his fingers, and the wraith disintegrated into dust. Just like that. Poof. Gone. Fred's last line of defense, his final ace, was reduced to nothing in an instant. Fred stumbled back, fear coursing through him. "But who the hell are you?" "Someone you should have never messed with," Karnak said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "But since you were dumb enough to summon all this death energy and lead me right to you, I guess we're going to have to end this." Fred's hands started shaking uncontrollably. "No, this can't be happening." "Oh, it's happening." Karnak stepped forward, and Fred could practically feel the weight of his presence, like a heavy fog pressing down on him. "Do you know what happens to weak necromancers like you in the world of the dead? They're the first to get eaten." Fred's stomach twisted at the thought. His legs felt weak, his body ready to give out. He had nothing left. No more evil spirits, no more clever plans. He was cornered. Barros stepped up, sword at the ready. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Personally, I'm hoping for the hard way." Fred collapsed to his knees, his last shred of dignity gone. "Please have mercy." Karnak raised an eyebrow. "Mercy? That's rich, coming from the guy who was just dreaming about killing nobles and forcing women to beg for their lives." He shook his head. "You're not worth the effort." Fred's eyes filled with desperation. I'll do anything. Just don't kill me." Barros looked at Karnak. "What do you think, young master? Should we let him grovel a little longer or just finish him off?" Karnak's lips curled into a cold smile. "Nah, let's wrap this up. I've got better things to do than waste time on low-level scum." Fred's heart pounded in his chest as Karnak raised his hand, magic crackling at his fingertips. He tried to crawl backward, but it was no use. The air around him thickened with the ominous energy of the spell. "Goodbye, Fred," Karnak said, his voice almost casual. But just before Karnak could unleash his magic, a distant voice echoed through the trees. "Stop!" Everyone froze. Fred looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in darkness, but unmistakably human. Karnak narrowed his eyes. "And who the hell are you?" The figure stepped forward, revealing a woman with piercing eyes and an aura of authority that immediately demanded attention. "You don't get to kill him," she said, her voice firm and commanding. "He belongs to us." Karnak tilted his head. "Us?" The woman smiled coldly. "The priests of Ratiel, and this little necromancer has a debt to pay." Fred's face paled even further. "No, not them." Barros sheathed his sword, his expression shifting to one of mild interest. "Well, this just got interesting." Karnak crossed his arms, watching the woman closely. "So you think you can just waltz in and take him? After all the work we put into tracking him down?" The woman's smile never wavered. "You can have him back, once we're done." Fred swallowed hard. Between the two of them, Karnak's indifference and the woman's cold promise of whatever torment awaited him, there were no good options left. For once in his life, Fred realized he might not actually get out of this alive. Chapter 18, The Darkness of Apocalypse 3. Cue epic music, something like dramatic drums in the background. Content warning. This chapter dives into some dark material, folks. We're talking assisted suicide here, so proceed with caution. It's about to get heavy. Fred stood there, commanding like a guy who just discovered he was a remote control for the first time. Rise, evil spirit, he roared, louder than that one friend who thinks volume equals intelligence. Obey my command, kill him! The wraith, however, didn't give a damn. It lay at Karnak's feet like a lazy dog that refuses to go on a walk, while Fred was up there, sweating bullets. Karnak sighed, side-eyeing Fred like you would when someone calls sushi cold fish rice. Why do you keep calling it evil spirit? It's a wraith, you know, Karnak said, like a teacher correcting the class clown who just can't seem to get it right. Barros, being the smug sidekick he is, sheathed his sword and chimed in. He can't help that he's uneducated. Oof! Burn! See, Fred wasn't exactly on top of his necromancy studies. His knowledge of the dark arts was about as deep as a kiddie pool. He thought evil spirit, then more evil spirits, and finally, super evil spirit. That's where his knowledge topped out. Like if someone had the power of the dark side, but thought a flashlight was dark magic. Barros, clearly having way too much fun, added, besides, a wraith is a type of evil spirit, isn't it? Technically, the guy's not wrong. Karnak rolled his eyes. It's just painful to hear. Imagine a battle-hardened general yelling, "Go forth! Humans! Attack! People!" Yeah, that's what Karnak had to listen to. It was like hearing someone call a Ferrari a fast car over and over again. Sure, it's not wrong, but damn, is it cringe. Fred, feeling his moment slipping, suddenly stopped and his eyes widened. That power, he stammered. Cue dramatic pause. Cue louder dramatic music. He finally realized what everyone else figured out 10 chapters ago. Karnak wasn't your regular evil sorcerer. He was a full-on necromancer. You're a necromancer too, Fred exclaimed, like a guy who just realized he's been eating ice cream with a fork his entire life. Karnak didn't even try to hide his sarcasm. You're just realizing that now? You're even slower than I thought. Fred was starting to piece it all together, but the dude still had about 2 puzzle pieces missing. Chaos power couldn't be used for necromancy, but Karnak? Well, he had leftovers of death energy that made Fred's power look like expired canned beans. Karnak's death magic was pure, like triple-filtered water, while Fred was working with the mystical equivalent of a leaky garden hose. Fred, now fully committed to playing the fool, cried out, "You'd rather be a lapdog for the order than help a fellow necromancer?" Cue Karnak and Barrow staring at him, mouths agape. If facepalms could kill, Fred would have been a goner right there. Did he really just say, "Help a fellow necromancer"? Karnak asked, sounding like someone who just found out their friend doesn't know how to boil water. Barrows shook his head in disbelief. He really is this naive. It's kind of refreshing, actually. Necromancers weren't exactly a friendly bunch. The only thing they liked more than death was other necromancers' deaths. Think of it like a really, really competitive job market, where the job is surviving. Fred, still somehow not getting it, tried to bolt. Yeah, real smart plan, genius. Just sprint out of there while the guy who commands darkness itself stands idly by. Karnak didn't even blink. "You're already in my hands?" he said like a villain who's been patiently waiting for the perfect one-liner. Sure enough, Fred's great escape was short-lived. His legs were seized by a giant shadow hand, like something straight out of your worst nightmare. The darkness wrapped around his body tighter than a pair of skinny jeans 2 sizes too small. The result? Fred choked, stopped in his tracks, with all the grace of a deer caught in headlights. While the darkness did its thing, Karnak and Barros were busy chatting, completely ignoring the fact that Fred was getting strangled in real time. "Oh, are you absorbing his necrotic power?" Barros asked, like they were gossiping over a cup of tea instead of dealing with life and death. Fred was just background noise at this point. And what did they decide to do with Fred? Oh, just a little light mind control to make him spill the beans, followed by the old make him stab himself in the throat routine. Barros handed Fred a dagger, and Karnak, ever the practical guy, stepped back. "We don't want to get blood on our boots. I mean, necromancy is one thing, but messy necromancy? That's a whole new level of gross." Fred, under the full control of Karnak, raised the dagger with all the dramatic flair of a bad B-movie, and splat! Blood fountain. Classic. Of course, they were smart about it. After all, they didn't want the Order of Ratiel sniffing around and realizing Fred didn't exactly choose to DIY his demise. Karnak absorbed just a little bit of Fred's necrotic power for research purposes. You know, like the dark magical equivalent of testing the waters before going for a full swim. As the blood dried and the necrotic energy settled, Karnak found himself unsettled. What he learned from the necrotic power left him looking like he just saw his credit card bill after a wild weekend. Barros, concerned as ever, kept asking what was wrong. But Karnak wasn't saying much, just a lot of staring into the distance like a guy who just remembered he left the stove on. Whatever Karnak found out during this whole ordeal, it spooked him. And let me tell you, when a guy who commands ghosts and death looks like he's seen a ghost, you know it's bad. And seen. Karnak nodded solemnly. Exactly. I thought I had left all that power behind, but because my body was composed of spirit energy tied to my soul, it seems I brought my necrotic power along with me. Barros's face grew grim as he processed this information. So you're saying the apocalyptic energy is yours? Karnak's voice dropped to a whisper. It's more complicated than that. My necrotic power has been seeping into the fabric of this world ever since I arrived. It's been distorting everything, warping it like a poison in a river. And that is what's creating the darkness of apocalypse. The room fell deathly silent. Barros stared at Karnak, shock rippling across his face. Then, the end of the world. It's my fault, Karnak confessed. His voice was quiet, but the weight of his words crushed the air around them. By coming back, I inadvertently set the prophecy in motion. My mere existence is what's bringing the world to ruin. Barros's hands trembled. Young master, this changes everything. Karnak lowered his head, his face unreadable. Yes, it does. Barros, still grappling with the gravity of the situation, spoke slowly. What will you do now? Karnak raised his head, his eyes burning with a cold determination. We will find a way to stop it. No matter what it takes, I won't let this world be destroyed by my mistake. Barros clenched his fists, determination hardening his resolve. Then I will stand by your side, as I always have. Karnak offered a small, grim smile. I know you will, Barros, but from here on out, we must be more cautious than ever. The closer we get to the truth, the more dangerous our path will become. Barros nodded. We will face whatever comes, together. Karnak gave one final glance at the study, the darkness of the soundproof barrier slowly dissipating. The shadows seemed to linger for a moment, as if they, too, knew the weight of the revelation. Then let us begin, Karnak said. The fate of the world depends on it. The chapter ends with the gravity of Karnak's discovery, setting the stage for the monumental task ahead, to prevent the apocalypse brought about by his very existence. Chapter 19, The Darkness of Apocalypse, 4. Karnak scratched his head, clearly frustrated. Damn it, there were clues all along, he muttered, sounding like a guy who just realized his favorite pizza joint was delivering to the wrong address for weeks. Now let me break it down for you. Karnak had become Astra Shaff, which gave him so much spirit energy that simple possession was impossible. His soul was like a nuclear bomb. Put it in someone else, and boom, instant explosion. It was kind of like trying to fit an elephant into a Mini Cooper. Things just wouldn't end well. His brilliant idea? Space-time regression magic. Sounds fancy, right? Like something you'd hear in a sci-fi movie. It was a workaround because simple possession was a no-go when your soul was so huge that even you couldn't handle it. Karnak had spent so long in his body that separating them was like trying to unstick gum from a shoe. Messy, frustrating, and nobody's having a good time. But this body is me, he mused. My soul acts as a guide, returning to a body that was always its home. Yeah, except things didn't go quite as planned. He nailed the part where his soul slipped back into his body, like sliding into a pair of old, worn-out sweatpants. He thought the rest of Astra Shaft's power was left behind, like an annoying ex that finally moved out. He didn't consider that maybe his soul was too much of a beast to be contained. Now he's scratching his head, wondering if his necrotic power, the goth side of him, had also hitchhiked back to the present. You know, minor detail. And oh boy, that's when things started to unravel. The darkness of the apocalypse, which sounds like something you'd expect from a heavy metal album cover, might have something to do with all this. Surprise! Barros, Karnak's trusty sidekick, blinked like he was trying to comprehend how deep this mess was. So you're telling me the world is ending because of some power you threw away? Probably, Karnak said casually, like he just admitted to misplacing his car keys. Barros wasn't buying it. Young master, No offense, but I didn't think you were that strong. I mean, the seven orders teaming up, trembling in fear of the end of the world? You sure about that? Karnak shrugged. Oh, right. Forgot I also destroyed the Church of the Seven Goddesses. You know, just casual world-ending activities. No big deal. But what about the dragons, fairies, the four great martial kings, and the three wise archmages? Barros threw in a shred of hope. All dead. Turned them into my undead minions. And if that wasn't enough, even the goddesses themselves had been ghosted. Karnak's power blocked them like a bad Wi-Fi connection. The dude was basically the ultimate apocalyptic overachiever. Barros finally got it. You did annihilate the world, didn't you, young master? Karnak gave a little nod. Yeah, but now it's biting me in the ass. Cue Barros's pale face as he finally realized the gravity of the situation. Karnak, who had conquered the world by the time he was 50, had now traveled back in time with another 70 years worth of raw, destructive power. 5 or 6 times stronger than I was when I conquered the world, Karnak casually remarked, like he was talking about how much stronger his coffee was today. Oh my goodness, Barros whispered, which is the appropriate response when someone drops a bombshell like that. Barros's last thread of hope? Maybe, just maybe, Karnak wasn't the culprit behind the apocalyptic madness. But Karnak knew better. The power matches me perfectly, he said with a sigh. Barros, ever the optimistic sidekick, piped up. So, can't you just call the power back, like yelling for your dog to come home? Karnak stared at him, deadpan. Sure, and let's pretend the gold coins I scattered in the plaza are going to magically fly back into my pockets. Spoiler alert, they wouldn't. Now the real kicker. Karnak was just as confused as the rest of them. How in the seven hells did his power end up spread across the world like a bad cold? We can't ignore this anymore, he said, channeling all his inner drama. The mad bastard that's ruining the world is, well, me. Barros, doing his best to stay calm, asked, So what's the plan, boss? Gather more info, Karnak declared, as if that wasn't already the most obvious answer. But first, it meant they had to run around like some doomsday collecting treasure hunters, gathering all the scattered bits of this necrotic mess Karnak had left behind. And, oh yeah, kiss that cushy life goodbye. Barros groaned. So much for a comfortable life in the territory. The two shared a deep, soul-crushing sigh, like a pair of guys who just found out their tropical vacation was canceled because of a zombie apocalypse. And of course, Karnak blamed the world for ruining his peaceful life. Barros, being the unfiltered, honest guy he was, shot back. What's the world got to do with this? You brought this on yourself, young master. Oh, shut up, Karnak grumbled. The next morning, Karnak summoned his vassals. I'll be gone for 3 months, he announced, like he was heading off on some weekend getaway. The excuse? Magic study, of course. Because, you know, when you're the lord of a territory and a world-ending powerhouse, studying magic sounds like the perfect cover-up for your disaster-cleaning mission. The butler was all for it. A wise decision, my lord. Meanwhile, Karnak couldn't help but think, I've had enough of those experiences already. And just like that, the vassals were supportive, sending him off with blessings from the goddesses. Karnak chuckled inwardly. Yeah, right. Those goddesses are conspiring to destroy me. Back in his room, Barros was packing for their apocalyptic road trip, looking less than thrilled about leaving their cushy life behind. Ha! Never thought I'd be packing this bag again. Karnak tried to cheer him up. At least we're rich now. We can eat good food and sleep in decent inns this time. Barros's eyes lit up. Local delicacies? Fancy inns? Count me in. So where were they heading? Karnak had an idea. Der Rat City, where Fred first got his hands on that darkness of the apocalypse. Time for a detective road trip, undead overlord style. Barros raised an eyebrow. Rat City, huh? That's where that Fred guy first got his hands on the darkness? I should have known it was going to be one of those visit the origin of the disaster type of trips. Karnak nodded. Exactly. If we're going to figure this mess out, that's our best bet. Got to trace the breadcrumbs back to where it all started. Barros sighed, but at least he seemed to be warming up to the idea. All right, young master, Rat City it is. But please tell me we're not going to walk the entire way like we did before. We've got gold now. Let's travel in style. Karnak smirked, tossing a gold coin into the air. Oh, we're definitely doing this the fancy way. No more roughing it in the wilds unless absolutely necessary. Barros's face brightened considerably. Finally, some good news. I've been dying for some proper food and a real bed. None of that back alley scrounging for scraps nonsense. With everything packed and ready, the two set out on their journey. It didn't take long for Barros to start grumbling again, though. So, you really think we'll find something in Derat City? I mean, it's not exactly the most charming place, is it? Karnak chuckled. Oh, it's a dump, no question about that. But it's where that bastard Fred got his start, so it's the logical place to begin. Besides, if anyone knows something about the darkness of the apocalypse, it's probably someone who's been knee-deep in it from the beginning. Barros groaned. Why can't these disasters ever start in nice, clean cities with good food and comfortable inns? Karnak shook his head, smiling. That's just how our luck goes, Barros. Chaos loves the grime. After a couple of days traveling in relative luxury, by their previous standards anyway, the duo arrived in Derat City. The place was, as expected, a mess. Derat wasn't the kind of city you visit on vacation. It was the kind of place you go when you're trying to disappear from polite society, or, apparently, when you're looking to get your hands on some apocalyptic dark magic. The streets were narrow. The buildings looked like they'd crumble if you so much as sneezed in their direction, and the air smelled like a combination of rotting garbage and despair. In other words, it was a perfect spot for shady dealings and the occasional world-ending plot. Ah, home sweet home, Barros muttered sarcastically. Can't wait to see what horrors we dig up here. Karnak laughed. Don't be such a pessimist. We'll be in and out, gather what we need, and then we can go back to enjoying the finer things in life. Barros didn't look convinced, but he followed Karnak down the main street, keeping a sharp eye out for any signs of trouble. And in a place like this, trouble wasn't exactly hard to find. They made their way to a dingy tavern, the kind of place where you'd expect a brawl to break out at any moment. The clientele was rough, the lighting dim, and the floors sticky with God knows what. But Karnak wasn't here for the ambiance. Let's find someone who knows something, he said to Barros as they approached the bar. The bartender, a grizzled old man with an eye patch and an attitude, looked up as they approached. What'll it be? He asked, not bothering to hide his disinterest. Karnak leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. We're looking for information, specifically about a man named Fred. He had dealings with something called the darkness of the apocalypse. The bartender's one good eye narrowed suspiciously. Fred, huh? Don't hear that name much around here anymore. You guys sure you want to be asking about that? Barros crossed his arms. We didn't come all the way to this charming establishment to ask about local cuisine. Just tell us what you know. The bartender grunted, clearly not thrilled about the direction this conversation was taking. Fred's been gone for a while. Ever since he got mixed up with that darkness nonsense, he vanished. But if you're serious about looking into it, there's a guy named Varon. Runs with a crew on the east side of town. He used to be tight with Fred before things went to hell. Karnak tossed a few gold coins onto the bar. Thanks for the tip. As they left the tavern, Barros glanced at Karnak. Varon? Huh? Sounds like another charming character. Karnak smirked. Well, we didn't come here to make friends. Let's see what this Varon knows about Fred and the darkness. They made their way through the seedy streets to the east side of town, where Varon's crew supposedly hung out. As expected, the area was even more run down than the rest of Derat. Buildings sagged under the weight of neglect, and the people hanging around looked like they'd stab you as soon as say hello. Lovely neighborhood, Barros muttered. Stay sharp, Karnak replied. We're not exactly welcome here. After a bit of asking around, they found Varon's hideout, a crumbling warehouse that looked like it had seen better days, if it had ever had better days to begin with. They approached cautiously, Karnak readying a spell, just in case things got messy. They entered the warehouse and were immediately greeted by the sight of a dozen rough-looking men, all of whom stopped what they were doing to eye the newcomers suspiciously. Well, 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 a voice called out from the shadows. What do we have here? A man stepped forward, presumably Varon. He was tall, muscular, and looked like he'd been in more than his fair share of bar fights. His grin was anything but friendly. You boys lost? He asked, cracking his knuckles. Karnak kept his cool. We're looking for information about Fred. At the mention of Fred's name, Varen's grin faded, replaced by a more serious expression. Fred's long gone. Whatever business you have with him, you're wasting your time. Karnak wasn't deterred. We're not here for Fred. We're here for what he left behind. The darkness of the apocalypse. You were close to him. You know something. Varen studied them for a moment, clearly weighing his options. Why should I tell you anything? Karnak smiled and raised his hand, summoning a small, swirling ball of necrotic energy. Because if you don't, I'll turn you into something worse than dead. Varen's eyes widened slightly at the display of power, and the room grew tense as his men shifted uneasily. All right, Varen said, holding up his hands. No need to get all spooky. I'll tell you what I know, but you're not going to like it.
And that's a wrap for chapters 16 to 19. Hope you're not feeling too crispy from all the flames, 'cause it's only going to get hotter from here. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, or you might find yourself on the wrong side of the Monarch's fire. See you in the next one.